Hey everybody, welcome to Chicagoland Chats with, as always, we are here to talk about the things that we're all dealing with during the COVID-19 lockdown. I'm joined, as always, by the still mustachioed Butch Zemar. Butch, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody, say hi.
Hey everybody, I'm Butch Zemar. From Elite Benefits, we help small to mid-sized companies with health insurance.
And my name is Adam Serwinski with Sidebar Insurance Solutions. We're an independent insurance agency protecting your home, auto, and business needs. Today, we have kind of a grim topic, I think, for some people because we're having seen a lot of transition in the market, but an opportunistic one for people to really kind of brush up their resumes, brush up their interviewing skills, and really find their dream job. And the person who's going to lead us that way is Keith Sbiral from Apochromatik. Is that right? I got it right? All right, and I'll let you do a little more explanation about what it is that you do and maybe a little bit about your background so people can understand why you're the expert they should be thinking about when they talk about resume redos or interview coaching.
Great. Well, we've done, my name is Keith Sbiral, like you said, and I work for Apochromatik. We do career transition coaching and consulting, and we work with folks who are before the crisis, we worked with folks who were simply trying to transition from one career to another or to find that job that has really good continuity with their values and is in good sync with their entire life. Now, as we move into this crisis, things have changed a little bit because we're going to see people who are out of work for no fault of their own and who are seeking work. So it's a little bit different scenario, and looking at your resume, particularly in a time of crisis, is something important that needs to be done. So that's what I thought we'd talk about today a little bit.
So talk a little bit, just before we get into the specifics of it, talk a little bit about your work history so we can get an idea of maybe your kind of executive history, your hiring history, so that they understand that, like, you're not just talking about this as somebody who can write a nice resume. You've actually been on the hiring side. You've been on the evaluatory side. You consult on those type of things, right?
Right. So I spent almost 20 years in municipal government and as a city manager. And in that role, hiring was, a key component, putting together teams and working with folks on trying to create that team that works well together. And over the years, whether it was for the organization I was working for or serving on a panel for another organization, I've done countless hundreds of hiring processes. And, over that period of time, you really get to know what stands out and what doesn't. And certainly over the last 20 years, how you go about getting into that top 10, top 3, top 5 position during an interview process has changed somewhat. But here so that's the background I bring to hiring, resumes, interviewing. My partner, Amy Gardner, also has worked in law firms and higher education her entire career, and likewise has managed folks and hired people. And so that's why we focus on what we do. The interesting part about this really is this: very few people really spend time on focusing in on the one or two things that can make their application and their approach to getting a new job really stand out. And so if you do that, you're likely to get in that top few percent because you're doing something that the other competition isn't. So focusing on that is critical.
So let's not bury the lead. What are those one or two things, three things you think really elevate resumes up the stack or applications up the stack?
Yeah. So when you're looking at your application, it's important to look at it comprehensively, right? So look at your resume, but also make sure that your cover letter, your references, any sort of writing sample or anything else that you're required to give has a cohesive feel to it. You don't want to have 3 documents that all look like they're from different people. You want to have, if nothing else, a consistent brand. So if you use a header at the top of your resume, use that at the top of your cover letter, use that at the top of your references as well. Keep that consistency in font, appearance, look, and tone of how you're writing in those different documents similar across the board. So I think consistency is the first really important key there. Now, going beyond that, you have to keep in mind that the resume is your personal advertisement for yourself, right? It's your calling card. It's your way to get your foot in the door. You're not going to get an interview if your resume doesn't get you there. So you want to make sure that that resume puts forward your value and what you can bring to the position that they are hiring for. So the second point, I think, is making sure that your message is on point. It isn't about necessarily just giving a recap and regurgitation of what you've done over the last 20 years of your life. You have to do that because that's part of the resume. But how does that apply to what you're applying for? How is that going to assist the organization that you want to work for? Make their job easy and get that message across to them clearly as to what you bring to them. And along with that, making their job easy, I look at things like with references. And if you're required to give references, please don't give 3 names and say, call these people or here's an email. Put a sentence or 2 with those names to speak directly to what those folks can say about you. I worked for John Doe. He can speak to my management style, my sense of humor, how I break things with IT. I mean, go ahead and put something in there that you can actually give them a reason to call that person. Because a lot of times from a hiring perspective, people don't even call the right references. So you're missing out on an opportunity to sell yourself. I think, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you were going to come with the third?
Yeah. So if you look at that and you come across a third item for resumes, I think simplicity is probably the third thing I would talk about. And that's particularly now when you can go on Fiverr or whatever assortment of online resources and have a resume created for you that has, some sort of stellar modern graphic design and is really eye-catching. We recommend to our clients to kind of stay away from that. You want to keep this simple. A lot of organizations now scan these resumes in. Gone are the days of having the nice linen paper that feels great in the hand and gives you this rich sense of importance when you hand in the resume. These documents are scanned in. Sometimes they're scanned in at a really low dot per inch rate, and they're not going to look that great anyway. So keep your font clear. Keep the stylizing simple and clear. Bold what's important to keep consistency with your punctuation and your styling and the different formatting that you're using, but keep it to a minimum because, again, it speaks back to number 2, which is making it easier for the person who's reviewing it. And if they're reviewing it on a laptop screen and it was scanned in and it's a little crooked to start with because of the scanner, having it just simple and clear and pointing out the key points is critical.
Hey Keith, so I don't know if you caught on, but I was in the Navy, so part of the exit of any military veteran, they have to go through a separation class, and I know I haven't had to deal a whole lot with resumes even since then. Thankfully, just very minimum. But I remember in that class that like the average recruiter or someone that's hiring for a job, I think they were saying that the average time spent on each resume is like 45 seconds. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, and whether it's 45 seconds or a minute or 2, it really depends on the position that's being applied for, how many applications are coming in. But the important part of that is that very little time is spent on that. So you have a few key opportunities to get your name and your candidacy flagged, right? You've got the cover letter, which should be succinct and should very clearly point out what you bring in value in a very limited amount of space. So indicate interest in the position, talk about why you're a good fit for it, and introduce your experience. But from the resume perspective, again, this kind of speaks to that whole concept of whether it should just be 1 page or 2 pages or 3 pages. depending on the depth of your career and how long you've been in the field you're in, you may have a longer resume, but think of it all as real estate. And some real estate is clearly more valuable than others. If you're along the lakefront and you have a parcel that you can build a house on, that's obviously a little more valuable than 50 acres in the center of Illinois where you can plant a crop. So if you think of it as real estate, make sure that you use that top of the fold right under your name real estate for the absolute most important stuff that you want to drive home. And if you're quite a ways along in your career, that probably isn't a objective or a summary statement or some really vague statement. Now, if you have something you really need to explain, why you have a gap of 6 or 7 years, that may be an important use of that real estate. But if it's not, then put in there what you think is going to be most crucial for the position you're applying for. And that actually brings a good point up, which is, while you should have a resume ready, and we always tell our clients, make sure that your resume ready and you have something to go right now, because you never know when someone's going to call and ask you to serve on a board or do some other activity. When you do find the job that you want to apply for, be sure that you customize that resume. So you want to make sure that that resume is customized for the application that you're putting forward.
What are your recommendations? I mean, a lot of times when you submit the resume, that's the end of a lot of people's journey because they have that 40 seconds. Do you have any recommendations on what the level of follow-up or tactics they can use after a resume has been submitted about a job they really are interested in, how they should go about it? What's the interval? Just guiding them through that it's just maybe not just a resume, a cover letter, a sample, and references. It's anything. Would you recommend anything before the interview, but in the meantime?
Absolutely. So one of the keys here is that you're trying to show your value. And there's no better way to do that than a personal connection. Most positions, in one way or another, are achieved through your network. So the first thing I would do is go on LinkedIn and figure out, even if you have a second degree connection or somebody that's kind of tangentially associated with the position, make sure that you reach out to them. And even if it's not something where they can find out about, the position can find out about you, maybe you can find out information about the position. So you can get a better sense of what they're looking for, if there's an internal candidate, all of those kind of things that weigh into what you're doing. And once you have that information, it allows you to better customize your application materials. So I think that's first, is really utilize a network and make a connection there. But if you take that a step further, make sure that you again add value based on what they're asking for specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but so let me. This is actually a new tactic. Maybe is there like a pre-interview, a pre-resume tactic that you were discussing, like reaching out and really targeting and allowing maybe those connections to direct how you're crafting that resume, that letter, that application, whatever it might be, in advance of actually submission?
Sure. And so both in advance and after, right? So once you've sent it in, the fear is you just never hear from anyone again. And a lot of people just let that lie.
Sure.
But you can find creative ways to reach out. You're going to be, it's going to be uncomfortable and inauthentic if you just reach out and say, hey, where you at? Where you at? Where you at? And send emails. But there may be something that you can kind of hold in the pocket for that exact reason. So maybe there's a paper that you've written or some sort of project that you're working on or just started, and go ahead and send an email and say, hey, this is really applicable to what this position is, and I just wanted to let you know I'm working on it. If you have any questions about it, I'd love to discuss it. Or I'd love to discuss it over coffee, or whatever the case may be. But try to find ways that you can make an authentic connection to that position that's at hand. Now, beforehand, what you were talking about, I think it's really important to work every angle you can. And that's not the, hey, my guy knows a guy who knows a guy, can you get me the job type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's more creating that narrative that you are the right fit for the position, right? So utilize that network, all of the work you've done, and make sure you have advocates, maybe even on the inside of the process working for you.
You know, I feel like we've inverted this conversation a little bit, but what you're talking about really actually makes me ask the question of how you go about or how you advise your clients and customers on finding what they really want or finding that fit and that passion. What you talked about earlier, which I think was really interesting, is what are good tactics that someone maybe who's been recently unemployed or has been out of the workforce and now because of current situations is looking to get back in, to really reevaluate, here are my values, here are the things that really matter to me, here's how I find where I want to be. What
Yeah.
tactics would you recommend for that?
So we have a service called resumeredo.com, and we work with people on the resume, right? So that's the document at hand, and I think people have a pretty good idea of what that's all about, as far as doing the resume itself. But what you're talking about is a couple steps back, really, and that's this concept of career transition coaching and finding a career path or a career trajectory that really fits with the values of what you have. You know, so often people get fired from a position, or people end up leaving a position, or by no fault of their own, they're laid off from a position, like we're seeing now during this crisis. And oftentimes the reason that they're either fired or have to leave a position or really don't like what they're doing is because they don't have a consistency of their values with the values of the organization they're working for or the work they're doing. Right. And so what we do is work with folks on the front end to make sure that they can identify what values are important to them. And that may be any assortment of things, right? So you may really just value time with your family and kids. And if you are at a top 5 law firm in the city, that's going to be really difficult. So finding a position that meets and matches your values is really important. So we do a lot of work around that on the front end to find the right positions to apply for, essentially. And you want to put yourself in a position where you're only applying for, you're not applying for positions just because they're out there. You know, the traditional wisdom is print off 20 resumes or 30 resumes and send them out and see what sticks. You don't want to do that. You want to be much more strategic about this. You want to make sure that you're really going after almost a surgical strike for a position that you want. And yes, you're going to be disappointed if you don't get it, but at the same time, you're going to have a much better match if you do get it.
And what's the alternative? Like, you just spend a lot of time on a job you really don't want or are going to be leaving shortly, right? So right. The alternative is probably even worse than really taking the time to figure that out. Do you have any strategies for how to do that evaluation, like what it looks like, or do you know, just some insight that people could take on their own right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you're on your own right now and you're trying to figure out what your next step is, first of all, try to separate the emotion from the search. Okay, so you are out of a job, you need a job to pay the mortgage. That's a lot of stress to be under. So I would probably start with a client by having them write down everything that is concerning them right now and all of the things they're worried about, concerned about, have an issue with. And then divide that list up into 2 boxes, one of things that they have control over and one of a box of things they don't have control over. And at this point during this crisis, when emotions are high and how you feel about any of this on any given day at any given hour changes, allow yourself time to worry about those things that you have no control over, but do it in a fixed amount of time. Allow yourself 10 minutes or a half hour, an hour, or whatever you want to do in the afternoon, or watching an hour's worth of news in the afternoon, and concern yourself with those things. But try to then distance yourself from those and spend the bulk and majority of your time on the things that you do have control over. And that is going to put yourself in a better mindset. First of all, you're going to feel like you are able to basically move the ball forward, because you're actually making progress on things that you have control over. So I think that puts you in a framework where you can then go to the job search and think, okay, I'm out of a job, I need a job, but I want to make this decision for the long term. And I want to make sure that I keep a career trajectory that's positive. And I want to make sure that whatever I do next is healthy for me, healthy for my family, healthy for, you know, the overall path of my career. And once you can give yourself that space and kind of think about those things, then I would start with the notion of kind of writing down what's important to you in a job. What do you value? What do you have? And then, you know, the next step is to go out there and look for things that meet those needs. There's a lot of positions that are going to be out there that are going to bounce back after this, and there's going to be a lot of things that are new and different. And so this is going to be a natural time of transition for many people in their career.
So I'm going to ask, we're on the path of how to search for a job, how to create the resume to make it attractive, and how to follow up and whatnot. But what if I reversed it on you? Maybe you have one or two tips for the solopreneur that's trying to grow, especially after this time, or a small business, or maybe a middle manager that's looking for some new growth and new blood in their system. Maybe one or two things that how to weed out some of the ones that are going to waste a bunch of time, or find the ones that like you're working with that are trying to stand out. Maybe you have some input on that.
Yeah, well, I'll start back a little bit from that and say that if you're an employee in an organization right now, make yourself essential. And that doesn't mean essential in the state statutory way of, you know,
Right.
You're going to be at work versus not going to be at work.
Mm-hmm.
But provide value to whatever organization you're in. If you're in a small organization of a handful of people, make sure that you are thinking out of the box, providing new ideas, and actively engaged. By all means, don't just sit at home and wait for the call to come back to work. Don't just passively obsess or consume your time with the really drastic realities of this situation, but make yourself essential in any way you can. Provide your brain power, provide your work from home ethic, all of those things that you can do. Now, on the flip side of that, from the solopreneur or the small business that is probably just barely hanging on, what we're telling clients is, first of all, make sure that you reach out and consider all of the assistance solutions that are out there for you. I know the city of Chicago has a page of solutions. When it comes to non-economic solutions, you can go to apochromatik.com/COVID-19. We have some resources there for you as far as career and business type items. But consider all of those solutions that are out there for you, and then really try to lean into this, because there is a small period of time here where you can take advantage of really redefining and reclassifying what you do. So if it's a matter of tweaking your product so that it's particularly important during a crisis, if it may be just a matter of changing the way you speak about it. So I do a lot of work with folks on executive presence, and executive presence is important for interviewing, for your position, for your career in general. But executive presence in the time of crisis is something that is particularly pertinent now. So how you appear on video calls, how you appear when you're working remotely, all of those things matter more now than they did a few weeks ago. So if there's a way you can pivot something you already offer in that way, executive presence in a time of crisis, or if you can add in a time of crisis to something you do that. It's not being insensitive. It's providing value and a need for folks that are out there. That need existed before this crisis. It probably exists during the crisis, and it may very well exist afterwards. So lean into this. Think about the things that you'll want or need to do. One of the things that I wrote down last night, I was writing some stuff for a program we're giving, and that was that how many times in the last couple of years have you thought to yourself, God, I just wish I had 2 weeks that I could just hit the pause button, fix all this stuff, reset everything in my business. If you've ever said that, you kind of have that time now. So, leverage this and take that opportunity and do the thought that you need to do the work that you need to do behind the scenes to kind of hit that reset button, because it is a good opportunity to do that and to be able to hit the ground running when this thing turns around.
So we talked a little bit about the resume and the pre-resume / post-resume kind of process that you advise. Let's get to the interview, because obviously that's going to be, I think, a bigger impact as to what being remembered, being thought of fairly, and also taking some of the objections and challenges in an interview can really make a difference for a candidate. What are your recommendations, just out of the blue, saying somebody maybe who hasn't done an interview in a while, or doesn't necessarily know what to expect from an interview after this kind of turnover?
Yeah, clients always get really nervous about interviews. I think we all do at some point. And the number one thing I tell folks is you shouldn't be nervous about the interview, because the topic of the interview is the one thing that you know the absolute most about, and that's you. So as far as preparing for the interview, you may want to, you can't under prepare. You want to go over all of those projects you've done over the years and all of those things that you've been involved in, so that they're top of mind, for sure. But don't stress out about the notion of interviewing, because it is you that you're talking about. Now, I think the most important piece of advice that you can give people is to be authentic. So don't show up as someone you're not, and don't show up in a way that is like some sort of slick sales version of you, or something that you're in no way going to replicate when you're actually working on the job. So certainly be yourself, be professional, have some sense of presence, but prepare that information about yourself. And again, just like with the resume, make sure that what you get across in asking questions is how you add value to that organization, how you could add value to answering that question, how you could add value to that team, because that is something that a lot of folks won't do. A lot of folks will answer a question with, yes, I did that when I did this job during these years. And that's a great flashback in history as to what you've done, and a great recollection of what you've done. But how does it specifically apply to the need of the person sitting across the table from you?
A lot of times the interview tactics have now taken the tone of give me an instance when, right? Give me an instance where. And I've heard a couple different techniques in responding to those, whether it be STAR or whatever it might be, like the acronyms, like kind of structure. Do you recommend these kind of structure style responses or CAN style responses to those type of questions or those type of objections? And if so, what would you kind of lean on, just so people have kind of, because sometimes those questions can put off a candidate, right? Or throw them back on their heels, and it's intended to. Like, how do you deal with that pushback? Any things you can offer on that?
Yeah, I think so. We don't directly have folks use any sort of really structured setup for those type of questions. I think that the best approach to that is to practice and to have a whole series of options at your disposal. So a lot of times, particularly for higher level positions, when people go into interview, I recommend actually putting together almost like a briefing book, right? So put together stories, examples, cases that you've worked on, clients that you've had, all of those type of things that create and lead to stories that you can tell. And then tell those stories as the questions come up, and as you can weave them into the conversation. So if you do that naturally, it comes off very authentically. And the key there is really the preparation, because you will come off more authentic. You know, some people say, oh, if you over prepare, you'll sound canned. You'll come off more authentic if those ideas are at the top of mind and you're comfortable talking about them, because they're actual stories you lived. So they're not going to sound canned, because you actually did, you did those things. You lived through those experiences, and you're applying those experiences to what they're saying. And so putting together a little briefing book that have, maybe a couple dozen of those type of experiences and stories that relate to those situational type questions can be really handy, because then when you're asked the question, first of all, you're not surprised by being asked the question, but secondly, you have a kind of a catalog from which to choose on how you might answer those questions, and they sound very authentic, and then you can weave in how they'll assist in the organization they have there. But you're right, preparing for that type of question can be a real game changer and put you significantly ahead of other candidates, because I've been in interviews where question after question after, in fact, I'll give you an example. Last year I was doing a contract out in Wyoming, and we were interviewing for a position there, and one of the candidates, we had 5 or 6 of those situational type interviews, and one of those candidates in every situation said, I can't think of a case right now, but I can get back to you. And that's just even if they were the ideal candidate, it put them in a position where it shows you all kinds of things, right? It shows you that you're not great at thinking on your feet, you're not really prepared, you haven't had the depth of experience that you portrayed on your resume, all of those type of things.
Awesome. So just one of the things is, I think a lot of these topics tend to lead towards people thinking about unemployment or thinking about, oh man, being in tough spots. But I really think it's an opportunity, and I think that people need to be optimistic. So as a coach, as someone who's looking at these people in transition, as we're kind of heading towards the end of this, give people some like optimistic thoughts or some things that can maybe channel or spur them on, a little gas in the tank, so that they can kind of take these challenges head on and maybe come out on the other side better than maybe they were before. Well,
for one, you're not alone. There's going to be a lot of people in the position that you're in, and that's good and bad. There's going to be a lot of competition, right? But for those who can utilize this time to be prepared to come out the other end, hitting the ground running, you potentially have a great opportunity to pave your way and make your path, particularly if you are a solopreneur or running a small business. This is going to undoubtedly be a very difficult time for all of us, but the opportunities that are there to pivot and to take a break and to reset and to figure out what it is that is going to work moving forward is here now, and you have that time. So take that opportunity, and if there's something that you've been trying to learn or something that you've been trying to master, this is a great time to work at it and to try to master it. So we've been telling clients, just by all means, stay essential and make sure that you're producing for your employer what you need to be producing, but also think about your own professional development, your own career development, because this is a great little pause to lean into it.
Butch, do you have any last questions before we kind of wrap up and let Keith kind of share some of the stuff that he has created for our listeners or viewers?
No, I think you walked us through quite a bit to help people with the transition that they're going through during this time. So I appreciate the input and guidance that you've got given.
So I know Keith, you and Amy have put together some pretty cool stuff for people. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing to help people through the COVID situation? I'll even share some of the slides here on the screen.
Sure. So there's a number of things. First of all, obviously, if you've been laid off or you have, really serious health things going on right now, seek out any help you need, and don't hesitate to reach out to other people, because I think now more than ever, people are in that kind of place where they're willing to help each other. That being said, what we've done at Apochromatik is a couple different things that you can go online. If you go to APO signup / cocktails during COVID on Monday and Thursday nights, there it is, cocktails during COVID, aposignup.com, cocktails during COVID. On Monday and Thursday afternoons at 5 o'clock Central Time, we're hosting a discussion to talk about these problems. It is a little bit of networking and meeting some new people. We've had people from all over the country on these calls, and we find out what people are talking about, what kind of problems they're having, and we try to make some connections and find some solutions for them, as well as do a little bit of coaching around what's going on. If you go to that website, aposignup.com / cocktails during COVID, you'll get the Zoom invite, and you can join us absolutely free and have a cocktail with us virtually. Also, if you join our website at apochromatik.com, you'll have the opportunity to have a free 30-minute coaching session. We're doing that ever since the COVID thing started, so that people who just have a list of questions or need to reach out for some help have the ability to do that. So just sign up at our website for that. The resources that we talked about already on the webinar were enhancedep.com, which is a section on executive presence. If you have a skill that you want to work on and you want to have help you during this time, executive presence and presence in general is a really important skill to have and an easy one to work on while this is happening. Of course, resumeredo.com. If you do want some advice on resumes, we highly suggest, whether it's resumeredo.com and Apochromatik or another career consulting coach, that you use someone in that field, because it is far more than just graphic design. And then finally, the apochromatik.com / COVID-19 is a whole bunch of resources there about dealing with Zoom meetings and working remotely, supervising remotely, all of those type of things. So a whole bunch of resources out there, and please feel free to use them and reach out to us via email. The email on the site there is amy@apochromatik.com. My email is really complicated. It's just keith@apochromatik.com, and no need to try to spell my last name.
No, absolutely. And I really want to thank you, Keith, for the time and all the insight. Hopefully that our viewers will be able to really take some of this to heart if they're going through a tough time, or even if they're in a spot where they kind of see the writing on the wall as things starting to tighten up. They can start to get ahead of this, or even make themselves essential, maybe reinvigorated to get back into their business and kind of really lock in. Right. So some great insights and some great help. Butch, anything you want to add before we take off?
No, I think it's great that you guys are willing to help out there in the crisis and give that 30-minute consultation. I think anybody on that's watching this or listening to it, I think should take advantage of that, just to, because it's available, but two, let's try to work through this together and make it stronger as we come out. So thanks for what you guys do.
And I know, too, that there's a lot of employers out there who are making some tough decisions, really care about their employees, and Apochromatik's a great resource for you. If you got to let some people go, unfortunately, from the tough times, Apochromatik can actually help them transition, maybe help these people who have really helped your company over the long haul. Apochromatik's a great resource for you to add on as maybe an exit strategy for as you're having to kind of offload some of the employees and overhead in this tough time.
I mean, one of your biggest supporters can end up being a former employee, and one of your biggest detractors can end up being your former employee. So making sure that if you have to do some layoffs or do some cuts, that you do that in a way that respects them and helps and assists them. We can certainly help with that.
Yeah, and in a way that makes, I think, a lot of sense for everybody. Makes it a win-win situation. So thanks again, everybody, for watching Chicagoland Chats. We'll be back tomorrow with, I think, some physical get up and go, some stretching with Ryan Gowron, right, of Primal Chiropractic.
Yep.
And he's going to show us some ways to kind of keep healthy and keep flexible and keep maybe stress-free during this difficult time. And we got a couple other visitors over the rest of the week. We'll keep these coming every day. We really appreciate everybody watching and liking and sharing this. It's been a good way to kind of bond and help out the community during this difficult time. So thanks, Butch. Thanks, Keith. We'll see you guys all back here tomorrow.
Thank you, guys.
Have a great one.